Am I hate?
Hi, thanks so much for being with us today. We are talking with the candidates for Multnomah County Chair. And I think I'll start off by having you all tell a little bit about the reasons you're running for this position. I think we should probably go in alphabetical order, if that makes sense. So Sharon, if you wouldn't mind going first.
Of course. No, I am so glad to be here. I am Sharon Myron, and I am currently the Multnomah County Commissioner representing District 1. That's all the county west of the Willamette River and also inner southeast out to Cesar Chavez. I also am a volunteer with Portland Street Medicine, going to people living outside, providing medical care to them. I am a recovering lawyer. I have 2 kids, 2 teens who are in Portland public schools. And really all the work I do at the county, the reason I'm running for chair is informed by all of these different experiences. And right now, I feel Multnomah County is a county in crisis. And we see so much inhumanity day to day, whether it's human beings living amidst garbage, people with mental health crises who are taken to jail instead of treatment, whether it's horrific acts of violence. It's so much. And I think all of us try to think about, like, how have we gotten here? But even more importantly is, so what are we going to do about it? And I'm running for chair because I have the vision and the skill set and the experience we need at this moment in time to do something about it. As a sitting commissioner, I've really learned that the power to set the vision and direction of the county lies in the role of chair. And I believe we need to be going in a different direction. So that's why I'm running, and I really look forward to this conversation.
Great, thank you so much. And I apologize, Sharia, I screwed up my alphabetizing, and you should have gone first. But if you wouldn't mind going now.
Second to best. I'm joking. So I'm Sharia Mayfield. I am an employment rights attorney. I work in the region doing workers' rights cases. I'm also a law professor at Willamette teaching privacy law. And the reason I am running is because, as somebody who was born in Portland and who has grown up kind of all over Oregon, but mostly in the Portland metro region, I'm very disillusioned by the current leadership that we have right now. And we are a county in crisis, as Commissioner Meieran has said. But the reason we're in crisis is because the current leadership, including 3 commissioners running against me, have not acted with the critical urgency that we need to address primarily the homeless crisis, which has been an emergency since at least 2015, a declared emergency, and the livability issues surrounding that. So really, my campaign is focused on rapid action to raise the floor, to get people who are on the streets into humane short-term alternatives, such as RV parks, tiny homes, safe rest villages, sanctioned camp areas, which I've been saying for a long time, that if there are already people camping outside, the very first thing we should be doing is at least creating zoned areas where they have access to hygiene services, toilets, showers, because there is a biohazard issue attendant to the homeless crisis. And it's not dignified, it's not fair that we basically use the outdoors as a waiting room for solutions. So while we have long-term action that I think is important to increase affordable housing, to build more units, I've done construction law, and it's not feasible that we're going to be able to scale the current solutions to the urgent crisis that we're in right now, when people need help now. People needed help 5-6 years ago. This has been an emergency for a long time. And so I'm coming in as the only viable non-commissioner, non-politician who doesn't have 5+ years of a track record of letting these emergencies explode and now promising us that they're going to find the solutions that they haven't been able to push forward with in the past thus far. So I'm disillusioned, and I'm not trusting that the current leadership has the ability to create that vision. And it really does come from a vision and a clear vision. And so that's where I'm coming in. I would focus immensely on that short-term solution.
Thank you. Lori, can you go next?
Yes, thank you so much. My name is Lori Stegmann, and I serve as the Vice Chair of the Multnomah County Board of Commissioners. I'm an immigrant and the first Asian American to ever serve on the board in 168 years. And I'm the only commissioner who serves all 5 of the major cities in the county. Previously, I served as a Gresham City Councilor and Gresham Redevelopment Commissioner for 6 years, and I've been a small business owner in the Rockwood neighborhood of Gresham, where I grew up for nearly 30 years. And while my business and political experience are foundational to running a nearly $3 billion organization with over 6,000 employees, it is my lived experience that enables me to lead with passion and with purpose. You may have heard of the famous Holt airlift, where over 3,000 Korean orphans were adopted by American families. I was one of those babies. And while I'm incredibly blessed to have been adopted by a loving family, we struggled with food and housing insecurity. But because I had access to public assistance at the most critical times in my life, I was able to lift myself out of poverty. And that's why I'm running. I want to ensure that everyone has those same opportunities to not only survive, but thrive. And that lived experience will help me implement real world solutions that I have implemented in East Multnomah County, which I hope to talk more about as the interview progresses.
Great, thank you very much. And Jessica, if you can tell us a little bit about why you're running.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. And hello, Teresa, Nicole. I didn't see you guys on there when I first joined. So I'm Jessica Vega Pederson. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Multnomah County Commissioner for District 3. When my husband and I got married 16 years ago, we bought our home in East Portland. At the time, I was a technology project manager. My husband had a new small business. And Hazelwood was a neighborhood that we could afford. And it was also a place where we felt we could fit in and be part of the community. There was a park like across the street from the house we bought. It was a walking distance to the library, to a supermercado. We have been in that house ever since. It's the same house, the same block, but it has been a rapidly changing community. It's an area that is made up of people from all over the world and who are all working hard to better this community, but oftentimes people are just working hard to keep their heads above water. And as somebody who's lived in many neighborhoods in Portland, I knew that East Portland was an area that had never had the same investments and attention that other places did. I got involved with my neighborhood association with the local Democratic Party, and then eventually I decided to run for office. And I ran my first campaign on the sidewalks. The fact that as a young mom, I couldn't take a stroller down the block without having to go in the street because we didn't have continuous sidewalks. And also on the speeds that people were driving, the dangerous speeds people were driving in my neighborhood. The East Portland community came together to support my first campaign. We were able to get sidewalks for East Portland, and we were able to get a whole lot more for the people of this area. And I've brought that power building, community building approach to every single issue that I've tackled since, both at the state level, at the state legislature, where I was the first Latina to serve in the Oregon House, and on this county commission. My leadership always starts with a broad table that includes communities that are most impacted by the issues at hand. And I really believe that fundamentally we should not demonize the other side, but realize that there really is no other side. There are just people who are working hard to fix problems in their own community. And when I was in Salem, I championed initiatives to bring paid sick leave to Oregonians, to get coal out of our energy mix, really fought on a lot of issues that I championed. At Multnomah County, I did the same thing. I worked to ensure cleaner air and water, a commitment to renewable energy. I'm really proud of the work that I did to bring neighborhood associations, businesses, and schools successfully to site new shelters and supportive services in my district, and really fighting to get better COVID response and resources for our BIPOC community.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Sharia, if you wouldn't mind going first on this next question, and that's, if you're elected, what meaningful differences will Multnomah County residents see 4 years from now due to your leadership?
Cleaner streets, I keep saying that. And so really dealing with the garbage crisis, the biohazard crisis, which continues to cause a sense of chaos and disarray to the average citizen. And I say we because I'm a constituent first and foremost, not a politician first and foremost, we're fed up with the livability crisis. So making it cleaner, addressing the homeless crisis more rapidly to give people alternatives so they're not living in the ditch or in inhumane, unsanitary conditions. I walk down Columbia, where I work off of Columbia downtown. at a law firm, and there are tents down there with buckets of human waste right next to it, and it's not humane and it's not sustainable. So that would be my first priority, is making the place cleaner, more beautiful in ways that you can visibly actually see, as number one, and then really coordinating with local law enforcement, with businesses, with private sector, with advocates and everyone else to try to make this place safer and come up with solutions to reduce crime and other livability issues such as drug addiction and mental health issues as well.
Great, thank you. Lori, same question for you. What meaningful differences will Multnomah County residents see as a result of your leadership if you're elected?
Decreased homelessness, improved public safety, and improved livability. Many of the things that we're dealing with revolve around our houseless crisis. We are working on a 24/7 first responder drop-off site. It'll be a single point of access called the Beacon Project. Right now, if you call police and you have someone who is in a state of crisis, they probably won't be able to come. And even if they do, there's no place to take those individuals. So we have to do a better job of triaging those folks and getting them to the appropriate services that they need. And jail is not it. So there's a multitude of levers that we can pull. One of the things I want to create is an Office of Reentry Services. That's a role that Multnomah County has expertise in, because we work with folks on probation and within the criminal justice system. And if we can turn that faucet off, then that will go a long ways into preventing people from becoming houseless in the first place. I'm also working on ways to connect property owners with nonprofits so that they can lease, do what are called master leases, which is essentially like co-signing for somebody to get an apartment. There's also other things that I have been doing, like I cleared the land use challenge for 224 units of affordable housing in Rockwood, as well as I led the charge to transfer nearly 4 acres to Home Forward in Troutdale, where we'll have 100 deeply affordable housing units. So it's those real world tangible results is what folks can expect out of me as the next county chair.
Okay, thank you. Jessica, same question for you. What changes will Multnomah County residents see 4 years from now?
So, I mean, we've all talked about this. Like right now, we are at a crisis point at Multnomah County. We have a housing and houselessness crisis like we've never seen in our region's history. We have this moral imperative to address both community safety and the systemic racism that we're seeing. We have to combat climate change. We can't do that quickly enough. What you're going to see with me as Multnomah County Chair is a way of working together, not just with the county, but with the city, with the region, with the state, and coming together in a cooperative way that we haven't seen before to really address these large, complex issues head on. I'm the only candidate in this race with both local and state level experience, and I have a track record of giving these big, complex things done. And that, and that starts with working together to get to the yes, not to be finger pointing, not to be placing blame or saying that that's not our issue, but really working together to address that. And as Multnomah County Chair, for me, the 2 of the biggest issues that we're going to be facing is going to be the housing and houselessness crisis. We have to really double down on using the existing resources that we have to get people housed as quickly as we can, to get people safely off the street into shelters as quickly as we can. So I'm a huge proponent of the 3000 Challenge PDX, which is about accessing empty apartments and having agreements with landlords to get people housed quickly. I think we have to use the spaces that we have available, the projects that are already in the works, to get people into alternative shelters, into hotel rooms, and really double down on that model and call on the state to continue funding those so that we can address that. I've worked really closely with small community organizations who are working with community at the front lines of people who have engaged in gun violence or at risk of engaging in gun violence, and I want to increase that so we can see increased partnerships with those organizations, increased resources to them, so that we can stop this plague of gun violence that we're seeing. We're already on track to have the most violent year in our history with where we are right now with gun deaths. And I think we will see more accountability and transparency with Multnomah County government. We have had taxpayers who have really invested in things like supportive housing services, in our libraries, in preschool for all, and we need to make sure that we're being accountable to those state dollars and those voters' dollars that they've been given us to put those into action. And then I think finally, what you'll see under my leadership as chair is that Multnomah County would be an employer of choice. We have a lot of work to do internally to make sure that we are respecting our workers, that we're protecting the safety of our workers, and that we're really valuing the work that they do that allows us to put the mission of Multnomah County into action.
Great, thank you. And Sharon. And I think you're still muted.
Had to happen at least once. Thank you. And so I would point to a few sort of big picture themes that would really change the trajectory of our government. And the main thing would be you would see a functioning local government, a functioning county government body. And the process stuff, the contracts, the outcomes, the procurement, people's eyes kind of glaze over when you start talking about it. It's not as exciting. All of that drives how we provide the services and have effective systems that function. And I would do internal work to ensure that effective systems and processes are in place to drive outcomes that we need to see in housing and homeless services, in behavioral health, in public safety. So that's one thing. You would see actual accountability from local government. You would see collaboration. You would see communication and transparency, which I think are things that are really missing right now. And for just sort of the general, those big topics that all of us are talking about, the housing and homelessness, you would see a significant decrease that because of data would be measurable in terms of unsheltered homelessness in our streets. You would see that, I would say, within a year under my leadership, because we do need to do things urgently and not just use the words urgent and throw those around. There's urgent action we can take. I have plans on my website, so you would see that, along with behavioral health systems that actually serve people in need. And I'm very involved. Commissioner Stegmann mentioned the Beacon Project, and it's much more than a police drop-off site. It is a potential game changer in our region in terms of emergency coordination of local behavioral health services. And so those are the kinds of things that the tangible things we will see, and the processes that will be in place so that we can actually have functioning systems that we as a community can actually trust.
Great, thank you. Let's see, Lori, if you wouldn't mind going first on this question, and that's a very, I guess, controversial, or the balance between shelter and permanent housing has been something that's been debated, and there's certainly a lot of attention on it, especially with the People for Portland, their ballot initiative, which is unclear kind of what that fate will be. But do you agree with how the county has so far kind of devoted its resources, and would you significantly change the amount of money that's going to emergency shelter in your first 2 years as chair?
I mean, the only thing that solves homelessness is housing. So yes, we do need to invest in more emergency shelter as well, but ultimately we have to have more housing. And here's the example. I have a family member who is never going to make enough money to afford a market rate studio apartment on their own. Inherently, our system is unaffordable. And so we have to be able to provide units like the units that I have provided in East Multnomah County that are have already been built or are being built. So I do think that we, we've got some one-time COVID funding, and we have invested. We have increased the number of shelter beds. I think we have an additional 400 shelter beds during COVID that we will be able to continue to have those open. But there are definite gaps. Like we don't have any family shelters for emergency shelters, except for there is one in Gresham called My Father's House, which is independently operated. And what's incredible about their model is that they have an 80% success ratio. They know how to shelter families and then get them into transitional housing and then ultimately get them into long-term housing. So I do think that there does need to be a shift into the interim. There's another great program called Bridgeway of Hope. The Salvation Army is doing that work where it's transitional housing for 2 years. The men are taught different skills. They have a culinary school there. And so it's really about not only do we need to provide housing, but we need to provide job training and skills. And with the recent, the new program that was passed through the governor's office, a $200 million workforce initiative. That was something that I'd worked really closely with Rep. Reardon on, and it was called Prosperity 1000. And this is for folks so that they will have access to, workforce training for over 10,000 of low-income Oregonians. So, I mean, it's not just about housing, it's about economic mobilization. And how do we give people the resources and remove the barriers?
Right. At the same time, the question, especially because this is a huge topic of conversation in the community, is whether you would significantly change the mix to, increase by X hundred beds. If you do actually have a number, how many beds in emergency shelter there would be. It doesn't sound like you. So would you significantly change that? Do you have a number in mind?
Well, I mean, I just asked that in our board briefing, and that is data that I really need to know how many people are being turned away from shelter. So I think we have to match the data with the need and understand where the gap is. I do know that there is a gap, but unfortunately, it's been challenging to find out what exactly that number is. So I say that we will go in the direction that the data points us. And if we find that there are more people being turned away from emergency shelter that want it and need it, then absolutely yes.
Okay, thank you. Jessica, same question for you. Would you shift kind of the focus of investments to go more towards emergency shelter?
I think it's such a dangerous and false choice to pit shelter and housing against each other. Permanent supportive housing has to be the North Star of where we get to for getting people permanently housed to solve the crisis of homelessness. And we have to create investments in long-term affordable housing at a significant level. And that includes not just creating more, permanent supportive housing, but also just increasing the number of housing units in general, which is a bigger issue than the county, but something as chair I would be a very strong advocate for, working with our city and state partners. But we have to. And what I think we have to do, we have had shelters and alternative shelters that have been found to be very effective. There was just a report that came out from Portland State about the village model and how successful that is, and how we can make it even more successful, what needs to be put in place. So I'm open to increasing shelter capacity in the ways that it has, but I think that the more important question is, what can we do immediately to help the crisis on our street that isn't taking away money from the things that we know are so important, like rental assistance dollars that are preventing people from getting homeless in the first place. That is a huge issue, and that was one of the biggest problems that I had with the housing measure from People for Portland that were put up there, is that it's going to take away dollars from rent support to prevent people from becoming homeless. If that money is taken away, we have more people becoming homeless in the first place. It takes away dollars from mental health and addiction services. And all of that work that is so critical. So I think that we can't take away the dollars in a significant way. But we are having more and more dollars every year because of the Metro-wide supporting housing measure, and we do need to continue to increase the capacity of shelters and alternative shelters. But I think we also have to be working in better coordination with Metro and with the city on some of the issues that we're facing with unsanctioned camping that are really causing problems with our city and our county and our region to really thrive. And that's, we have people who are camping on sidewalks that are blocking the sidewalks. That is not, you're not supposed to be doing that, right? You're supposed to be leaving that. That's not being enforced right now. And that is an action that we can take right away. We need to be looking at how we can provide, better safety and health and hygiene resources for people. And I think that the county absolutely has to be part of that conversation in terms of providing some of those resources, providing dollars for trash pickup, even though that's not something that we do. And so I think there's ways that we can really improve what we're seeing on our street today. We can build more capacity in our shelter system, and we can still stay true to the long-term goal that we know works of getting people into permanent supportive housing.
Okay, thank you. Sharon, would you significantly change the amount that's going into emergency shelter?
So I'm going to somewhat respond to my fellow commissioners' comments and respond to the question. Because we don't have data, I don't even know what the numbers are. And I think arbitrary numbers that can lead us astray. What we do need is people are living in squalor on our streets, dying in ever increasing numbers, and we are not doing something urgently about that. We need to spend the money it takes to actually set a baseline that is a humanitarian baseline that puts people in a better place with better safety, health, and dignity. I personally believe that can be done for relatively less money than I think a lot of the plans that are currently out there, which is why I don't say, oh, we need to allocate this amount. We also have virtually no data about who is living outside. People who are experts in the area and do the work estimate 5,000 to 10,000 people living outside. And so, when we talk about numbers like 400 in one of our shelters or 300 in all of the safe rest villages, that's a drop in the bucket. We need to be doing things urgently to address basic human health, safety, dignity, which also will improve the health and safety of our communities. And I think what we have just heard, I think this is one of the key points of where I believe that I differ from my colleagues here, is what I've heard are the talking points of the status quo. These are points that say words that seem to make sense. And when you apply them to the reality in which people are living and dying, they just ring false. And I feel that it's essential we back up what we do by data. But I have to say, I'm an ER doctor. It's first, we need to save lives and stop the bleeding. So yes, we need to do more there. And of course, and the beauty of it is that can put us in a place to get people on a better path to be amenable to long-term housing. But I honestly don't understand, and I can imagine what Sharia is going to be saying to this, but I honestly don't understand how we are at this point, but I would take urgent action.
Thank you. Sharia, same question for you. Would you alter the focus of spending at all to emphasize emergency shelter beds more?
Yes, I would do everything in my power to push for that, and not just shelter beds, but let me be clear, any short-term alternative option to raise the floor. So that includes sanctioned camp areas, tiny home villages, RV parks, yes, rent vouchers sometimes, but I think what we need to focus on here is we have two issues, and while they overlap, they're not the same. The homeless crisis and the housing crisis are separate, and while, like I said, they have some overlap, the main issue with the homeless crisis, which everybody with eyes can see, is that it is a drug addiction and mental health crisis as well. So you cannot address the homelessness crisis unless you are rigorously addressing the drug addiction crisis on our streets, primarily the methamphetamine issue, and then also the mental health issues that often are attendant to that as well. And as somebody who actually does have local experience working in county criminal defense, when I was in Meieran County, I did see the huge overlap of criminality, homelessness, drug addiction, and mental health. And I've also done civil commitment appeals. And so what I do know is just putting somebody into a house with severe mental health issues will lead to property destruction, houses burning down, harm to the self, harm to the others around the person. These people need services. And so you can only get services if you're on the street, if you're put into a place where you have a fixed address, you can get onto Social Security disability benefits, so you can have an income. A lot of these people have mental health disabilities, mental disabilities, physical disabilities. So I radically want to change the direction because the status quo isn't working. We have the second highest unsheltered population in the US. What more data do we need? We can't sit around and wait for all the data and say how many are out there, how many are not. I say get to work right now. That's what I mean by urgent, is not waiting longer and longer. We know what we're doing isn't working. The permanent housing model is fine for affordability issues. It's not fine to deal with the homeless crisis. So first things first, help as many people up a little bit as you can, rather than giving a few people a lot. And also, if you look at my plan, while I think building more housing is fine, as I said, as somebody who did construction law, that's going to take several years. The cheapest housing we have on the market now are the homes that are already there, subleasing, roommating, putting people together. Commissioner Stegmann mentioned that most people can't afford even a studio, and that's unfortunate, and we really need to address that. But in the meantime, incentivize homeowners, mom and pop landlords, to invite somebody into their home. I live right next to an elderly couple who shut down their doors for good and will never rent out to anybody because somebody with drug addiction issues caused severe property damage, and they had to wait for months for a court to evict that tenant. And so our policies here have actually backfired with too many tenant protections. You can have the smaller landlords phased out, and then you don't have the cheap housing available. Look at other states, look at other places in the world. We're not the only people who have ever dealt with homelessness. And so trying to reinvent the wheel when we know that just getting people off the streets should be the first step to save lives, to get them sober, to connect them to services, that would be my priority. So absolutely, while I think the People for Portland initiative could have been written better, and I don't know about exactly 75% being the number, I still support moving the narrative in that direction urgently. And urgently means acting even if you don't have all of the data.
You've hit on actually two of my other questions. So I'd like to stay with you to just explore this one aspect a little bit more, and that's the problem of housing. That I believe that there was a report that came out from Econ Northwest, a revised report that found that more than 6,400 single family homes have been taken off the rental market since 2015, mostly in Portland and Multnomah County, and mostly since 2017. Landlords argue that it's because of increased restrictions and regulations, such as the rent relocation requirement. I guess my question is, how would you counter that? What is the county's role in either spurring additional private development, or do you think that the county should be championing, an additional affordable housing bond, for instance?
And should we start with?
Yes.
Start with me? Okay.
Yeah.
So 3 things. I think we need to reconsider scaling back some of those protections to the extent that it has phased out the small landlords. We have to listen to small landlords as well. If we lost thousands of units because they don't feel they can keep up with the huge commercial landlords and they can't absorb the risk of having somebody destroy their property because we have a meth crisis, then we need to start listening to them and saying, how do we incentivize you to reopen your doors again and rent out? That's number 1. Number 2, we need to we need to deal with the zoning laws. That's just how I'm going to say it. I'm optimistic about now having the small units, the tiny home units, the ADA compliant units that can now be placed in people's yards. I have one right next to my house that was just dropped down with a crane. I didn't know they could even do that. I think it was a crane. It just dropped it down. And that's great too. So we need to be more creative with allowing development of high density type housing. And number 3, again, going to my home share program, which you can find on my website, votemayfield.com, look it up. Basically, it's a county run program similar to Harbor for Hope, which is a private program, but at the county level, where you provide background checks and assurances to both the tenant and the landlord who want to participate in this program, and link up working class people. These are not people on the streets who have severe issues, but people that are working, students who just can't afford to pay for their own studio or apartment. Put them into the mom and pop home, link them together with the cheapest housing, and then say to the tenant, if you fall on hard times, just like we have the rental assistance program, I do support this. We have a rental assistance fund where you can provide a declaration of hardship, an affidavit of hardship, and we can pay, the county can pay for 1 month, maybe 2 months if you slip through the cracks and you just can't keep up. That gives assurance to the landlord that they're getting paid. It gives assurance to the tenant that they're not going to get evicted and kicked out because they can't pay for 1 month or 2 months. And so it's a win-win for everybody. You're helping the landlord, you're helping the tenant, and it doesn't cost a lot of money. I'm a lawyer, and if I saw this program, pay the lawyer $100,000, you will find lawyers who will do this and mediate and do conflict resolution if they need to. I would even be willing to do something like that if that program existed. And that's why I created it. It's modeled after what I would participate in, even as a lawyer, to help solve the housing crisis.
Thank you. Lori, what about you in terms of helping spur additional housing, either development or making more housing opportunities available?
Both. So as I mentioned, the master leases in my personal life, I'm a small business owner and I work with property owners and multifamily owners. So the Challenge 3000 or the 3000 Challenge, they're saying that there's, I don't know, 30,000 units, or that could be too high, but they're saying that there's enough units out there to house many of our houseless folks. So I'm in the process, I'm working with a nonprofit and a property management company to house 20 houseless individuals who make enough to pay the monthly rent, but they don't have the down payment, and then they also have barriers on their rental application. And so that's what's really important, is to work collaboratively with organizations like the Rental Housing Association of Oregon and Multifamily Northwest to create a pilot that assures property owners that they can be held harmless, and that when issues do arise, that there's a third party that can address those issues. The other things that we can do, we have something called Second Home in Gresham. This is for youth that are like juniors, seniors, kind of like the home share, where you're matching youth who are homeless with individuals. On the building side, there are other ways to build. And the problem is that we haven't matched the cadence of the solution with the avalanche of the problem. So modular homes, 3D homes, these can be built in a matter of months. And as we know, when we look at a lot of the housing that's coming down the pike, it takes literally 2 years to get this housing online. So we have to have a much quicker route to getting more units. And those are 2 ways we could do it. And then the last thing I would say is converting commercial space. And I do think that that's a role that we could get some legislation to incentivize commercial owners of property to redevelop their property into residential. So I think there's, we talk a lot about the downtown core and whether or not people are going to really be coming back in force. And I don't think that they will be, but there are opportunities to have more residential housing in downtown.
Great, thank you. Jessica, if you can answer the question, just in terms of what you would want to do to spur additional housing opportunities or housing development. Is this a public responsibility, a private developer responsibility, any number of those things?
Yes, so I think we've heard some great ideas. One thing that I do want to say is that the fact that we don't have that we're underbuilding, like they're estimating between 2020 and 2040 in the Portland metro region, we are underbuilding by at least 60,000 units across the board for housing, with an additional 10,000 for homelessness that we're going to be underbuilding. So the fact that we are tens of thousands of units across the board for housing does have a huge impact on our problem with houselessness today. And the fact that the cost of housing is so high, the cost of rent is so high, is a huge factor in people experiencing houselessness. West Virginia has some of the highest addiction rates, but they have some of the lowest housing costs, and they don't have the same issue with widespread houselessness that we're seeing here or all along the West Coast, for that matter. So, as Multnomah County Chair, I think that making more housing available has to be a huge priority. whether or not Multnomah County is in the business of building those housing units ourselves, supporting things like home share, which is the model where you have folks who have rooms to rent, have people who are connected with them to live in those rooms and have agreements and have assistance with making sure that relationship is working out, is a really good thing to do. The 3000 Challenge PDX, where it's about, getting people connected with landlords for those, additional units, is going to be huge. Where you have wraparound services to help support those people be successful, because we don't want it to be a revolving door of housing with either of these situations. We want to make sure people can stay and be successful there. And then the master leases. I mean, that is something that I think we've used successfully in the past. It's something through Project Turnkey that's been successful throughout the state, and we need to continue to invest in that. I'm also concerned about, how we're looking at the capacity to build in the future with some of our land use policies. Right now we use past performance basically to say how much land we need in the future to build housing stock. And that, since we're underbuilding already, we're just never going to get out of that hole that we've dug for ourselves. So that's something that the legislature is going to be taking on the next legislative session. It's something that I think Multnomah County and the Portland region especially have a lot of interest in making sure that that's successful. So we're planning for the housing capacity that we need with our land use policies. And then I would say that we need to be talking about the next housing bond, right? We need to be talking about how we're going to continue to invest in building housing at the affordability level, so people can continue, so it's achievable for the people who right now can't afford to live in Portland, can't afford to live in Multnomah County. We have to be talking about that. I would like to see a housing bond that has a setup where we can have more private developers actually participate and be a part of building that housing capacity, because and making sure that we're setting it up. I've talked to so many developers who would love, especially out here in East Portland, where it is a little bit more affordable to be able to build. And they would love to be building some like privately developed affordable housing, but they run into roadblocks at the city level for doing it. They have, problems with getting the right permitting or the things that are done. And a lot of them are just giving up on that. And so we have to work to make sure that, that we're making that as easy as possible. That's not necessarily a county thing, but it's something we can be working with our partners at the city on.
So along those lines, would you support or would you urge the city to roll back inclusionary zoning or inclusionary housing requirements, or any of the rent relocation, for instance, to in response to mom and pop landlords who are no longer now renting to people?
Yeah, with the inclusionary zoning, the thing that I've heard, and this is really what I've heard anecdotally, is that we're seeing so many more of the like 15 to 19 unit buildings being built instead of higher capacity, because developers don't want to take part in in the inclusionary zoning requirements around there. If that's the case, then I think we do need to have a conversation about what is the right level that's required for that. I think overall it is good to make sure that we're continuing to add to the capacity of affordable units, because we know we do not have enough of those. But what that right number is, I'm open to looking at that.
Great. And Sharon, same question for you about housing. I guess what would you do to spur development?
I actually think this has been a really great sort of give and take, and I agree with most of what my fellow candidates have offered, because these are the types of solutions that can move us forward. And I think the key behind all of it is engaging with the landlords and finding out what those barriers really are so that we can address them, and having a relationship there. And I don't think that has been done nearly enough. But I think there's a lot of work and potential ahead to be able to forge those relationships. And then it is a matter of sort of master leasing. And Commissioner Stegmann has been doing a lot of work on that, which is really great. And home share is a program that I've been championing at the county that I think has so much potential. And things like conversions of different types of space, and thinking about the 3000 challenge and what that means and how we can connect. But it really is about establishing those relationships, learning what the barriers are, and then moving forward with those opportunities. And I think there are a number of them. And the one thing that I would add is insurance and liability is such a huge issue. So exploring ways that we can really help landlords in, just getting rid of that worry of, is this person going to come in? And I think it was Sharia that mentioned it with their meth use. They destroyed an apartment, or whether it was they've been living outside. I've heard one of our providers told a story of someone came in and they weren't used to living inside. They lit a fire in the living room and burned the thing down. So we need to be partnering to address those issues and the concerns and the realities that are out there. We only learn that from working with our landlords as partners in figuring out how to move forward.
Great, thank you. Jessica, let me start with you on this question. And it's about substance use and behavioral health services. One of the things that kind of came out with the Domicile Unknown report for 2020 was that 62%, I believe, of deaths had substance abuse or substance use as a factor. Recognizing that it's going to take years to house everyone who is homeless, what immediately can the county do to help address that use and address the deadliness, increasing deadliness, frankly, with fentanyl as well, to either, to bring down that part of the crisis?
Yeah, we absolutely have just such a crisis of addiction on our streets that we're seeing, and it's deadly. We're we're seeing it on our streets where we have experienced death of the high school students because of these opioids that are laced with fentanyl, right? This is a crisis that we're seeing across the board, and it's truly tragic. Both my colleagues on the commission have talked about the Beacon project. That is something that I'm also a huge fan of. This is something that is going to be setting up a place where people can go, that first responders can take people to and drop them off when they are experiencing high acuity behavioral health issues, and they can be held for up to 5 days and get connected to care, further care. Then they're going to have enough medical resources there to help folks detox, right, so that they can be medically supervised under detox as they're having a stay there. I think this is absolutely something that we've needed. It is, and it's going to be staffed, and it's going to be resourced at the level where they can handle the higher acuity cases that we're seeing on the street, where Hooper was not built, to handle those. So I think that is a huge thing we can start, and that's an investment that I think that that's a resource that I think the county needs to be a strong partner in. I think we have to do a better job of making sure that we have the mobile crisis units that are responding to people that are going out to where folks are on the street, to make sure that they are getting the resources that we have enough resources that they're going to actually be able to show up when people call in a timely manner, that they are going to be available, not just like business hours, but they will be available, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week when that need is there. So we don't necessarily, have to be calling the police for things, but we will have responses for people who are suffering from addiction. I think we have to put more urgency on the state to get the dollars that we have allotted, that voters have funded with Measure 110, of getting resources out onto the street immediately. We just had a briefing this morning on how things were going with the behavioral health resources that the state had, and time after time, we're hearing the state has not allocated those resources yet. We need those resources so that we can hire more outreach workers, so that we can be making sure that we are going to be able to fund the work that our community-based partners who are actually working directly with the community are going to be able to provide, which is a big question mark right now. And so we have to be working at the state to get those dollars out. And I think that we also have to be working at the county level. We do a lot of our work with people who are uninsured and underinsured. That's really the wheelhouse where we work. But we have a lot of folks who are working with the CCOs of providing the treatment that they need, the mental health services that they need. And we have to be working in partnership with those organizations to make sure that we're setting up the system of care that works. So there's a lot. This is a crisis on our street. We know that people are dying on our streets so often because of what we're seeing, and we have to get to work immediately to be getting these dollars into work and getting these resources online.
Great, thank you. Sharon, what about you? What immediate steps do you think the county should be taking on behavioral health?
So this has been a passion and priority of mine from long ago. There was an Oregonian op-ed that I wrote like back in 2009, like long time ago, about the opioid crisis in the state. I was president of our Oregon College of Emergency Physicians then. We see it on the front line in the ERs. We're like the canaries in the coal mine. We are elevating these things, and then maybe some years later, we start to see a response. I feel this at the county. I came in 5 years ago saying meth is this thing. The opioid crisis is bad. We need to look at meth and what we're doing. And we need to look at our domicile unknown report as people are dying in increasing numbers, what's happening. And that has not been prioritized at the county. I have made recommendations since then to address that domicile unknown report. I have asked that we have a meth czar at the county, someone who is, really tuned into best practices and understanding of meth, so that because we have approaches to opioid use disorder and those we can build up. We have treatment approaches, medication assisted treatment, all kinds of things we can invest in. And I've worked with our jail, our corrections health officers to start initiating programs in jail to get people into treatment and that kind of thing. There's a lot of work we can do. Methamphetamines is a scourge and it is dangerous. And we are not, to my knowledge, we're not doing much to be addressing that proactively right now. So we need to invest in that work at the county. I've been, and both of my fellow commissioners have mentioned the Beacon Project, Behavioral Health Emergency Coordination Network, that I've been involved in since its inception. And that I'm on the governance committee now. It's a little bit different than what it's been portrayed as, but it has the potential, if we are investing in it and putting in the resources now over the next year, to open and be a triage and stabilization center to connect people to different services for substance use disorder. So I would support that. State advocacy, the state, I think there was just there were some articles about the state not getting funding out. So we have programs we could be doing. And because we're not getting the actual money that should be coming to us from the state, we can't put them into play. So we need to be advocating at the state. The state also sets the rules for a lot of what we need to see behavioral health. So longer term advocating at the state level. And I've been working very closely with our CCOs, the directors of both of our CCOs, because there's some really innovative work that they are doing that we should be collaborating at the county level. And if I were chair, I would be pushing for urgently at the county level to partner.
Thank you. I think Lori, if you can go next, and then Sharia, and then I am going to probably start actually timing people because we do have a number of things to get through and not much time left. So Lori, if you can go next on that.
Yeah, absolutely. The fentanyl and the meth drug issue is out of control. And I don't think that people realize what that is a driver of homelessness, of property crimes, car theft, catalytic converters. So what I would propose that we do, Portugal has an amazing model where they treat possession, kind of like our ballot measure 110, they treat possession of any drug as a health issue, not a crime, and they mandate that people receive treatment. But drug dealers are still jailed. So if you have less than a 10-day supply of drugs, then you're going to go get treatment. But they have found that this is actually surprisingly or not, it's less costly than putting people in jail. And they've seen that their drug-induced death rate has plummeted to 5 times lower than the European average. So that is one thing I think that we need to look at and adopt that kind of model. The other thing is I want to develop something similar to the Portland Street response, but you would have a law enforcement member there. Because when you're dealing with drugs, you need to have law enforcement. I'm not sure that we talked about the Behavioral Health Resource Center that we're opening up this year. So that I'm really excited about. That will be a day center and have transitional housing and shelter for people experiencing a behavioral health crisis. And then going back to the Office of Reentry Services, a lot of these individuals are frequent flyers and they get churned through our system because we are not solving the problem. We are just churning people through. We need to redirect people into the appropriate resources. And that's what the Office of Reentry Services will do. And the other thing is we have jail space. And we have room. We have a great program through the Volunteers of America. It's called a Treatment Readiness Program. So there are opportunities for us to provide services to folks that are being incarcerated that could address this drug crisis.
Thank you. And Sharia.
Thank you. 2 things. So first, we need rapid expansion of dual diagnosis treatment centers, which has not been a priority of the government currently. We should have one of these centers in every single district at the bare minimum. Those should have been starting construction years ago, as we know that the meth crisis has only gotten worse. According to that Domicile Unknown report, the most recent one, 49% of the unsheltered, the homeless deaths involved meth. That's almost half. You go back 10 years and look at the report, it was 3% to 49%. So we know the problem has only exploded. And unfortunately, because leadership hasn't prioritized dealing with this, knowing that it has been a problem for so long, it continues to get worse. And I do think they need to take responsibility because county commissioners are in charge of dealing with that particular type of issue. So going forward, we have to change course. Again, all 3 of the commissioners running against me have said they support and pretty wholeheartedly support even safe injection sites. Whereas I have said we must put all of our energy into prevention and treatment, and in some cases, mandatory treatment. So I support expanding Project Respond, increasing funding to them. Commissioner Stegmann said she likes Portland Street Response, but they need a law enforcement officer. We already have that. We have clinicians teamed up with law enforcement already going out there and responding to crises, and then making a determination if somebody needs transport to a hospital to get treatment, to stabilize, and then to possibly be civilly committed, which again, I did do civil commitment appeals. They are part of the solution. That includes people with severe mental health issues and substance abuse disorders as well. They are a danger to themselves and to others, or they can't take care of themselves. Those are the people that would qualify for potentially civil commitment, not just anybody with drug addiction issues. For the remainder of people who have drug addiction or mental health issues, but they're not an imminent danger to themselves, to others, they're not wandering into traffic, they're able to take care of their basic needs, those are the ones that we should be working with on a voluntary basis to try to move them into treatment, not normalizing drug addiction, not encouraging drug addiction, not giving them sites where they do drugs, but to really focus on getting those dual diagnosis centers in place so you don't have to jump through hoops. You don't have to go to this center for drug addiction treatment and then this one for mental health treatment. And as of right now, we do not have those county funded dual diagnosis shelters or treatment centers in each of our districts. I would begin with doing that immediately.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'm going to give you each a minute to this question. And when there are 5 seconds left, I'm just going to put up my hand. And then I'm going to unceremoniously cut you off. Let's see. So I think this goes, actually, I lost track. Lori, would you go first on this? And basically, it's that Mayor Ted Wheeler has taken recent actions that have angered some homelessness advocates and others in the community, including banning camping along highways. He's also proposed creating large sites where potentially hundreds of people could camp. Do you agree with these ideas, and why or why not?
The mass shelters I do not agree with. I think we have to provide services, and a scale at which he's proposing is just not feasible or workable. It's not safe. I just don't know how you staff and manage a location that has 1,000 people in it. And yeah,
And
good
to be
luck.
clear, he has pulled back from that and has not said a specific number of people, but it could be potentially hundreds.
Yeah, I don't see that working. I mean, and the other thing, I mean, unless he's changed his mind, is that you can't just warehouse people. You have to provide services. And so your other question was about the banning. Certainly, I saw somebody walking on I-84 the other day at night. That is insane to me, and I'm frankly surprised that more people haven't been injured. So I do think that protecting, having a vision zero approach, way too many pedestrians are being killed on our streets.
Great, thank you. Let's see, Sharon, if you wouldn't mind going next, and do you want me to repeat the question? It's basically some of Wheeler's recent announcements and your views on it.
Yeah, I feel like that he is being reactive rather than proactive in addressing any of this work, and he's applying band-aids rather than taking a broad-based, systemic, proactive approach informed by people living in the system, people working in the system, the best practices, the research, the evidence. There are so many opportunities to accomplish similar goals with buy-in that are a win-win for everyone. And instead, I see these approaches that are just kind of lobbed out there, and I don't feel that's the right way to do this, and I don't feel that these are the right approaches. But I think we can come to the right solutions, and I would welcome the opportunity to collaborate with the mayor and talk to him about some of these approaches.
Great, thank you. Let's see, Sharia, can you go next on that question?
Sure. I would say I support his efforts to move people off the highways, which is dangerous to the people on the highway and who are sleeping there, and then to everyone else driving around it. We've seen increase in homeless deaths of people along roads and highways. So that needs to be step number one. That shouldn't have been allowed in the first place. That's hard to coordinate when you have multiple jurisdictions overlapping in one area. As to the massive camps, I have huge concerns that if they're that huge, having hundreds of people, possibly 1,000 in one place, that we're just going to have potentially open air drug markets. We're going to have people committing crimes in there. There's assault. And then also even the homeless folks, we have to remember they're at heightened risk of facing crime themselves from other people in there who might have mental health or drug addiction issues. It's not fair for them to have an increase in rates of assault and rape and things like that. So I like that he's moving in the direction of emergency action and wanting to think maybe more creatively about big solutions, but not that huge, smaller ones.
Great, thank you. And Jessica, what are your thoughts on Wheeler's recent proposals?
Yeah, I mean, I think he was trying to do some kind of response to reflect the urgency and anger that people are feeling, but they were the wrong ideas. I mean, the one thing I will say is that I do think that getting people off of the highways or unsafe streets, actually, okay, that wasn't a good idea. But what really was disappointing to me is that there was actually no outreach or coordination with the county to say, like, okay, we're going to put this proposal out there. What are we going to do now that we're telling these people that they can no longer camp here? Are we going to have shelter beds ready for them? Are we going to have apartments ready for them? Are we going to have hotel rooms ready for them? That kind of partnership was completely lacking from the city of outreaching to the county. I know they said that they let the chair's office know about the plan, but letting somebody know about the plan is not the same as working in partnership to actually find a solution that's going to do more than just move someone from one place to another without any kind of assistance or outreach. Okay, and so, and then I think that we have to be very careful about the proposals that will just further traumatize and make people experiencing homelessness more vulnerable.
Great, thank you. Let's see. I did also want to ask briefly about gun violence and whether there's anything that you have, any ideas in terms of what the county can do to either partner with the city of Portland or address gun violence within its own borders if elected chair. And why don't we start with, I think, Sharon first on this, and I'm going to give you just 30 seconds on this.
Oops. Sure. So we have some really good upstream approaches in place. We have some good reactive approaches in place. What we need is the emergency response. That it cannot be a law enforcement response because it will take years to implement, but we can implement some non-civilian people who can address gun violence in real time that we can employ as peers or get on board at the county and address services. So I think there's opportunities. We need to explore these.
Great, thank you. Let's see, and Sharia, can you go next on that question? Just if on gun violence, if there's anything that you think that you would do as county chair.
Well, county chair doesn't have jurisdiction over law enforcement, but I would definitely be pushing for reinstatement of the gun violence reduction team in tandem with reform at the PPB level to ensure that we have competent officers who can respond to these violent situations. And yes, I do think law enforcement needs to deal with the rise in violent crime and homicides in tandem with those changes to ensure that we have a good force and accountable force as well.
Great, thank you. Lori, how about you?
We currently have something called the Gun Violence Behavioral Health Team, and I'm going to advocate for continued funding of this team. It's a group of folks, it's mental health clinicians and people of lived experience who provide support at gun violence scenes. So people that are actually in a hospital, if a victim needs help, and also family members can call and get support. And the other thing we have to look, we've already talked about, is the meth and the drug crisis that's going on, the fentanyl, and the relationship with gangs and homicides, and what is the driver of those homicides.
Great, thank you. And Jessica.
So we need to be resourcing community partners and community organizations to do the prevention and intervention work to address gun violence, and we have to be funding public safety to be addressing the criminal aspects of it. As county chair, I will adequately fund our sheriff and DA's office to meet the needs of providing justice in our community. We've already dedicated more dollars to the district attorney's office to hire more investigators and public attorneys to make sure that they can be prosecuting gun violence cases. As chair, I will also work on collaborative budgeting across all our departments, including the DA's and the sheriff's office, so that we can be looking at our public safety investments across the board and make sure we're leveraging those resources in the right way.
Great, thank you. And finally, and you addressed this in the questionnaires where we asked about what the county did wrong and what could be done better for in response to the heat events of last year. But just this week, we saw that Multnomah County failed to open emergency shelters on Sunday, and then several inches of snow fell. I guess I'd like to hear just what should why did this happen, and what should the county be doing to be more agile so that when there is snow on the ground, when it is cold, you don't have to have a whole day's advance notice before you can actually open shelters. And 30 seconds, and I can't remember. Let's start with Sharia on this.
I would push for single member districting at the Portland level to ensure proper resource distribution to areas that are underrepresented, primarily BIPOC communities that didn't necessarily get the same amount of help because of the area they're in, and ensuring that it's equitable. And then in tandem with that, we need to ensure that the emergency shelters are open all the time. I don't think we should have to wait for a weather emergency or 4 hours of snow or it's this. No, it should be open all the time so that nobody ever freezes or overheats on the streets.
Great, thank you. Jessica, can you respond?
Yeah, one of the things that COVID has done is help the county set up and have a robust emergency services response, and that was put into great effect during COVID with responding. And what it also showed us is that we have to do a better job of responding to the emergencies and having more of a permanent structure set up to respond to those things. So I do think that this is a call that we should have made to have shelters open when we had those when we knew that the weather was cold and it was going to be snowing. And as county chair, I will make sure that we have a standing committee that is anytime that there is an extreme weather, whether it's heat or cold coming up, that I will engage them to make those decisions ahead of time.
Great, thank you. Sharon.
Yeah, thank you. I have the unique perspective of being an emergency physician here. I've worked as a medical provider in those shelters and on the streets when people have not had access, and it's unconscionable. I have raised this at the county a number of times. What we are doing now is decentral. We are bringing more people in to be part of the decision making rather than streamlining and having single approaches to accountability, we need our emergency response to be empowered to take action immediately, and we need to change the criteria.
Great, thank you. And finally, Lori.
I think it's better to be safe than sorry. Even if sometimes it's hard for us to know exactly what the weather's going to do, but I think it's more important for us to err on being too cautious than not cautious enough. And the other thing is, I live in East County. The temperatures, the wind chill factor is extremely different than downtown Portland. And so I think that we have to have kind of a lower threshold that allows us to open up those emergency shelters earlier before inclement weather comes.
Great. Thank you so much. And I apologize. I hate having to time people, but there's a whole list of questions that we didn't even get to. So I figured I should probably speed things up a little bit. Thank you all for all your time. I know that you guys have hard stops at 5, and we appreciate all the time that you have given us. We'll be in touch if we have any further questions. I do have a few follow-ups that I will call you guys separately on, but appreciate your spending the afternoon with us.
Thank you so much for
Thank
coordinating
you
this.
guys.
Sure.
And to
Thanks
the
so much.
candidates for
Thanks,
respecting the
all of you.
time limits as well. I appreciate it. Everyone, take care.
Thank you.